this will be our first moment for question and answers, and I'd like to invite Chris Matthews, Chris Lindner, and Michael Ball up to the front, and they will be happy to discuss the questions that you might have for them. And also, often this setup ends up with the presenters question one another too, so that's absolutely fair game. So, in the back.
I have a question about the Stuccan excavations, please.
Sure.
Did you find, I was looking at the faunal assemblage. Oh. Did you find any deer? And would you expect to find deer at other local sites or comparable sites?
There was no deer in that collection, which was a surprise, considering that I was expecting, based on what we were seeing in the field, that there would have been more wild species, but everything that I thought was deer was proven to be not deer. By the analysis was done by Pam Crabtree, who's a professor at NYU, and very reliable. This is what I'm trying to say. And so I would have expected, but we didn't. So and I don't know what to make of that, other than my theory is that they replaced what they needed from deer with domesticated animals that they had themselves, but didn't switch entirely to domestic. Okay.
Well, I have a question for Chris Lindner about the Person family.
Yes.
And you had mentioned their kind of broader linkages to medicine,
Yes.
and I wondered if you could say a little bit more about that.
Yes. Linkages to medicine. This word?
Microphone.
Talk loud enough, I think.
Pull it towards you.
Good. Wasn't bad. Let's see. To take it chronologically, we start with the minister's family. We know from 1793 to 1773 to 92. The minister had, at least in the 1790 census, 4 slaves. My theory of developing is that the minister was practicing medicine, spiritual medicine, that healing was done largely through prayer, just as illness was thought to be a spiritual matter. And that probably his entire household was helping in that, growing foods, herbs, and treating in various ways the illnesses at that time. In 1805, the parsonage is in possession of his sister-in-law, who was slaves. Her sister, their son became a physician. Okay? The slavery people enslaved continue at the parsonage. There's an interruption, and then, in 1805 there was a birth. And we believe that that birth to a slave named Zion, or Time, her daughter may have come to live there as Mary Barber in 1830 in the census, with a second cousin of the woman who may have owned her. He was a physician. And the Person family, as you see, they're in the center there under the photograph of the house. This is information, but the father, Henry, was a farmer, become a cobbler, and his sons were boatmen on the Hudson, hence perhaps the sailboat, although it could have, between the house and grammar, it could have symbolic connotations as well, I think quite like them. Their daughter, Emma Jane Person, the last person to live there, died in 1911, was a domestic in the city of Hudson nearby for a physician. There's a generational constant association with medical practice.
I have a follow-up question about the faunal assemblage in Setauket. It seemed like the soft shell clams were very high in number, and that, in my mind, is unusual as compared to the hard clams and the oysters. Can you explain that in any way?
My only explanation, and I wish I could be more scientific about it, is that this site is on the shore and they are right there. So you walk 10 feet and you've got dinner. So it's not that the other species aren't there, but I think perhaps in that location that was more more commonly available right at their shoreline. That whole coast has been understood as sort of clam flats, but no one ever said historically that those are soft shell or hard shell clams. But so I have a guess is my answer. Which I can tell you more.
Thank you.
Hi, I'll stand up. You can see me. Thank you all for your presentations today. This is for Mike, former colleague. Nice to see you. I was wondering if, in your work with the Coopers, if you were able to do any descendant community research, since they were associated with the Friends Church, if you found any, any sort of oral histories or any type of descendant information as well.
So that's an excellent question. Unfortunately, we didn't. It just wasn't part of our scope of work. The project in and of itself was in advance of a gas-fired power generation plant. So for the project, they had to satisfy federal regulation requirements. And the scope that we worked out with the Historic Preservation Office didn't include descendant community research. And unfortunately, because of the nature of the project, folks that were working on the project had to have name tags and sign in, sign out. It was a high security area. We also couldn't invite members of the community to come and participate, which was unfortunate because it would have been fantastic to have individuals who are associated with this community and an ethnic enclave that still exists today to be part of the project. But the project constraints just didn't allow it.
Thank you.
This is for the Silas Tobias site, not to belabor that one. The lithics expert that you had look at your projectile points, and I just want to clarify, determined that they were contemporary with the Tobias residents at the time and not related to any indigenous prior settlement. And if so, if I have that correct, what did he estimate their use was for? They look like typical hunting projectile points and not something that would be used, let's say, in the preparation of leather, etc. Is that correct?
The first part is correct. There's the lithics are found throughout that midden, and there was no evidence that the midden had been turned over or anything like that. But also, just to make a clarification, the point I did show, the chert point, which has been retouched, it was a black point. That probably is not something made by the Tobiases, but something found by them and perhaps retouched. Oh. That's his idea. But there's no way of knowing when the retouching happened. But the remainder of it, most of the quartz, he does think was manufactured on the site by the family. Use, I don't know if we know if he was able to tell me anything about what they would have been used for specifically, but I could look that up, and if we want to connect later, I can find out. I can look again at his report and see if there's any more he can help you out with. But yeah, there was that one black chert point, and there was another one that looked very much like they'd been collected. And as you had the one find, sometimes these are exposed and collected for the same reason they've been collected by anybody. And the potential meaning of them perhaps varies from community to community, but I think pretty much everyone thinks it's a cool old thing, so let's keep it. And so, yeah, just to make that clarification. Thanks.
Yeah, could I add something to that?
Yeah, sure.
You mentioned that knife It's in the exhibit at the side. There were other flakes from making such tools that we found dispersed around the site. But it reminds me of, I mentioned that the Mohicans were pushed out of the Hudson Valley in 1746. They were on their way to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where they would be safe. They had been missionized by Moravians in eastern Dutchess County, so on the Connecticut border. And they would have felt safe at the parsonage. Minister's house, they were religious people, they spoke German, some German. He did it. So the crystals that I mentioned were around the well and inside the cellar, the root cellar, and at an opening into the root cellar. So those are all key places for things to be positioned. We don't know who put those there. They could have been Mohicans, because we know indigenous people in this area are using crystals in spiritual ways on the numerous sites in central Hudson Valley. They could have been Africans, because crystals, as you saw later, are used in African ritual spaces. They could have been German, because folklorists in Germany tell us in the 18th century the crystals are used in healing with water. So it could have been all three as well. They could have been a kind of object that people understood what it meant. That it was about protection, about healing. So that's the theory I would like to go with. We'll keep looking.
For Dr. follow up on that, have you thought about, excuse my voice, have you thought about looking at Yoruba and Dahomeyan traditions as to the iron, particularly
Yes.
looking at those principal cultures?
Yes.
Concentrations of iron are not as featured within Congo, but there have been a number of archaeological finds thinking about altars that have a Dahomeyan or Yoruba.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that then?
So yes, very much we'd like to see whether we can find supportive evidence of that connection. We could reference Chango or Ogun, the thunder blacksmith god from West Africa, yes. So that's another new direction to go.
So this is a kind of a broader question for the three of you to answer about. I wonder, you each to some degree work with or interact with community members, be they descendants or non-descendant community members who are interested in your projects, and maybe not specifically this one, Michael, but other projects you've worked on. I wondered if you could say a few words about how that interaction with community members has maybe raised questions that you didn't think about, has pushed your research in a different direction. What has working with community members done for your research in the way that you think about the sites that you work with?
Your turn.
Oh, my turn. So yeah, in this project in particular, I've worked with Higher Ground Agricultural Heritage Association, which is a community-based preservation organization founded in 2004 to establish a historic district for their neighborhood in Setauket, which had been overlooked and ignored as a historic contributing feature of the otherwise highly documented and celebrated historic Setauket landscape. And so that organization formed to create a historic district, and then learned that there's more that you can do with that, and there's more that you need to do with that. And so I was fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time in a sense, and was asked to come in and talk about the potential of archaeology. And then we ended up excavating at two sites, doing an oral history program, an archival research program, and collecting a lot of data. But the work with the community is the primary point, so thank you for your question. This is a community, as a lot of communities of color are, especially if they are historic communities existing today, struggling for the most part to be recognized as historic, and also to have access to the resources that make one people or place historic in the first place. I think one of the things what I learned, and one of the things we're working on still, is how do you take the needs of that community and communities like it more seriously than we do in normal preservation practice. I work with a very smart, very accomplished, very frustrated man who is my principal colleague, who has felt that the entire process, to use a political word of the present, is rigged. To get anything recognized is a ton of work. We all know that who are archaeologists. But to do that as a community-based organization of people of color is twice as much work. And to have access to the powers that be in the preservation world is helpful to know the white archaeologists with the university affiliation, but it does not do enough. And so what we feel like, and what I've said and written about, is this is sort of like archaeology in the making, because this community is having a very difficult time surviving. People are leaving because it costs a lot of money to live there. They've moved on with their lives. And so there's this sense that some communities are gone, as you've mentioned, and some are still there. The leaving and the disappearing needs to be part of our story as well. And so directly, he's been very excited, or the community is very excited about having archaeology and having the attention, but indirectly, they see that this is a very difficult situation they're in. And so what I'm advocating for is a lot more work on our part for something akin to like an affirmative action approach, to saying, these are communities that need our attention, these other communities do not. So for example, when this Place Matters or One National Trust program came together and did a contest, how many people can you get to like your program? And we got like 250 people to like our program in Setauket, and the Newport, Rhode Island community got like 25,000. It's just sort of like, and then they win. You're like, hold on, that's not the way it should be working, because they've already won. Right? And so those are lessons, I guess I've taken away.
Okay. Let's go to Chuck.
Yeah, I'll go. So a lot of the work that I do professionally is compliance-related work. I also am president of a statewide archaeological society, and that is largely public-based. But among all of us in the room, really the archaeology is to give individuals a voice and a better understanding of their own cultural heritage, and make them feel as if they are important, because they are important. So my work with communities has largely been inclusivity, but also listening and providing individuals with information so that they can have a strong stake in their own cultural heritage. Because in large part, folks from disenfranchised community have just simply been overlooked. Particularly, during much of the 20th century, up until probably the last decade or so of the 20th century and into the 21st century, where there's more of a movement, thankfully, of inclusivity and understanding that otherness is important. It's greatly important to our understanding of not only our collective cultural heritage, but the different makeup that makes up America, and why that's important. So really, archaeology giving people a stakehold is the essential outcome of what we're trying to do. But that inclusivity is also greatly important, and it's important not only for communities to understand where they came from, but also for the preservation community as a whole. If we're just centering on white great men at the expense of women, children, people of other ethnic heritage other than European, we're losing something. So that's really what it's all about.
Well, I mentioned in the last acknowledgements that Don Cruz, who wrote Getting Honest, who's I think our greatest fan. So he comes around, checks on us, jokes, puts us down in our trenches. And he's the first person I called when we found the cosmogram. Came over, looked at it, had me to lunch. Said the first time he ever baked pie. The second person I mentioned there by name as our funder traces her family back 12 generations, and her genealogy would fill this table. It's not long. Lady Rumpke of the Hoover Foundation. And it was that deed that you saw signed by Livingston and Hayner to her great, however many times, grandfather. We also share the parsonage not only with the history department, where these documents come from, so there are local historians contributing to our research. We share it with the Germantown Garden Club. And their founder has been talking to me for years about excavating at the far end of her backyard, which is right on the bluff overlooking the Hudson River, because we believe that that's the original road down to the river, and that's where the community started. That road ends where the first church was. It was the first 1710, the first school. So we found traces of that. But Frances Zaz has said repeatedly, and she keeps coming to our presentations and says it again, you've got to look at the water. It's the water that will make things work here in so many ways. It's a very wet town. I moved there myself and can testify. It's very wet. It's a problem, but it's also a resource and has potential that we're, I think, just beginning to understand. So there's a key insight and key information and future information once we study this table-long genealogy.
There's one more question in the back, and then I think we'll have to break.
Pertaining to the family of Richard Cooper, when were blacks first accepted into the Quaker community as members?
So it starts very late, during the late 18th century, and there's only a couple African Americans that are accepted during that time period, and it becomes slightly increased during the 19th century, but by this time, most African Americans want to develop their own sense of religious and spiritual following. So you get Methodists and Baptists and Episcopalian groups forming by and large, and they're not really joining the ranks of the Society of Friends, and that's what you see in community after community after community. Is Baptist churches and Methodist Episcopal churches forming, largely because of they're more fluid in terms of the dynamics and the stringent nature that you would find in other Christian groups. Those are more relaxed in that community, in Baptist and Methodist communities. So there's more of a opportunity to accept other religious or incorporate other religious aspects of communities that African heritage brings and African cultural heritage brings. So I don't know if I answered your question, but there wasn't a lot of African Americans joining the Quaker ranks, partly because of a lot of the Quakers were also being very paternalistic, particularly in the Delaware Valley, in terms of providing land to African Americans, but also overseeing their daily occurrences. And folks want to have their own independence. They want to establish their own churches, and that's part of the reason why there wasn't a big influx of African Americans joining the Quaker ranks.
Okay, well, thank you so much.